Football season is here, and it's time to bet with my bookie. Use promo code Gators and get a free $20 wager with your first deposit. Your winning season begins today, only at my bookie.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode to preview the South Carolina Gamecocks, as always, will be Will Gunter, co-host of the early game on 107.5 The Game in Columbia, South Carolina. Will brings it every time when we talk South Carolina football, and this one will be no different. A lot of good insight from a team that lost to Tennessee last week, looking to bounce back to get a big win over Florida. Look, last year they beat number 3 Georgia, and Florida's number 3 right now, so a lot of people are going to be pointing to that storyline. Can South Carolina get another back-to-back seasons, get a win versus a top 5 opponent there? So they have the capability, if you go back to last year and how that Georgia game played out. But Florida should win this one, and we'll preview South Carolina and maybe what they can do to make this game a little bit closer to the Gators. Given Florida problems the last couple years, of course, the big comeback in 2018 and then back and forth game a little bit last year. So they match up well versus Florida in certain aspects. So we'll see if South Carolina can play Florida tough once again coming up this Saturday at noon on ESPN, the first home game for our Florida Gators. Remember, coming up this Sunday will be our review episode with Nick De La Torre from Gator Country, Graham Hall from the Gainesville Sun. They'll join me on Sunday as we take a look back at the South Carolina game. And if you haven't yet, you can go back and listen to our Ole Miss recap. And also Will Miles and I back on Monday took a look back at Ole Miss, went in some depth more about the game, and also a little quick peek at South Carolina and what we kind of expect to happen this week. Remember, you can get your Gators Breakdown merchandise at ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown. That is ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown. Link will be in the description as well to get you some Gators Breakdown merchandise. Everybody, thanks for the support out there. And that's one way. Look, all the listens are plenty. I'm completely happy with that. But if you want another way to support Gators Breakdown, you can get some Gators Breakdown merchandise. And then remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. All the Gators Breakdown past episodes are there, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators. Please share, rate, and review the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. It really helps us out here on Gators Breakdown. Or check us out on your favorite podcast platform if you need the audio version only. And follow Gators Breakdown on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. If you're already subscribed, if you're already following, thank you very much. If not, please take care of that and support Gators Breakdown. And joining me now is Will Gunter, co-host of the early game on 107.5 The Game in Columbia, South Carolina. He joins us every year previewing these South Carolina Gamecocks. And Will, got to go up to Columbia last year, so thanks for all the hospitality of that. That was a wet, drenched, rainy game there. But once again, I know it was a year later, man, but that was a blast up there.
Yeah, we always have a good time. And I tell you what, surprisingly in this series over the last several years, majority of games have generally been pretty competitive. I mean, you've had a blowout here and a blowout there. But by and large, man, I mean, we'll talk about this game today, but it's been a relatively competitive series, especially compared to about the first 15 years of South Carolina being in the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. Last 2 years, Dan Mullen's first 2 years, come back 2 years ago, and then a kind of back and forth game last year after South Carolina jumped out to a lead there. So, absolutely. So, take us back to last week, of course. The SEC kicks off, and South Carolina jumps out to a quick 7-0 lead and then has to fight their way back to make a game of it versus Tennessee, put themselves in position late, and then it's kind of just some terrible luck there at the end.
Yeah, terrible luck. I think I'm talking to the wrong fan base, though. Florida fans have seen this, and I think that's where South Carolina fans are. They're just, whatever reason, man. Will Muschamp just whether it's players playing uptight or just flat bad luck. I don't know. At this point, you don't know with Will Muschamp because he looks on the surface like a guy who would be a really good head coach. He's very organized. He seems to have his pulse on the pulse of his locker room. He's an X's and O's guy. I mean, I think he's a very smart football guy. But man, for whatever reason, if something can go wrong for Will Muschamp, it goes wrong. And last week, South Carolina, right, comes back, ties the ball game at 24. Defense is playing better, and then 4 plays, Tennessee turns into the New England Patriots from the early 2000s with Tom Brady and Randy Moss, and they just go down the field in 4 plays and go up 31-24, and South Carolina's able to get a field goal, cut it to 31-27, and holds Tennessee, and then Tennessee punts, and just typical Will Muschamp team. It hits a player, bounces off of a redshirt freshman's leg, and Tennessee recovers. South Carolina never gets the ball and a chance to go down and win the ball game. So it's just kind of that stuff. I go back, all the things you think about with Will Muschamp and what his last game as the head coach, or last game before he was let go by Florida, came against South Carolina, and it took 2 miraculous special teams plays by then a Steve Spurrier coach team, a blocked field goal and a blocked punt for South Carolina to win that game. And again, I think the world of Will Muschamp. I think he there's a lot of things that South Carolina needs as a head coach, but for whatever reason, it doesn't translate when they step on the field on Saturday, and that happened again on Saturday night.
Well, man, you sound like me in 2014. I mean, especially after that South Carolina game, that was the reaction. If it could go wrong, it did go wrong, and it found a way to happen there. So after last season and the tough schedule and disappointing record, and now starting 0-1, what's been the reaction of the fan base?
Well, the fan base is just, they're done. I mean, there's a lot of people done, or there's the vocal minority, I guess, the people that want to call and text into the radio station each and every morning. Unfortunately for Will, he came to South Carolina with baggage. There's a lot of people who say, well, if you can't do it at Florida with the facilities and with the resources, how are you going to do it at South Carolina? And certainly, that first year, man, he didn't have a good football team, but he somehow got him to a bowl game, and I know they went 6-7. And the next year, they go 9-4 and really kind of turn things around. Although if you go back and look at that schedule now, it certainly broke South Carolina's way. I mean, I think South Carolina played like Tennessee was about to fire Butch Jones. I think they played like 3 coaches that year that have been fired. I know Randy Shannon brought Florida up to play South Carolina. That was kind of how that season would go. But they got to 9-4 and beat Michigan in the Outback Bowl, and then you slid backwards both years. And obviously 4-8 doesn't work for any fan base. And South Carolina, who's at least had some success this decade, really doesn't like it. Then you factor in again that baggage with Will that we've already started talking about, and there's just not a lot of people that believe long term he's the guy. And so you go into a season like this. South Carolina was supposed to open with Coastal Carolina and with East Carolina, probably 2 games that they would have won, and given themselves a chance to work out some of the kinks of Mike Bobo's offense. Instead, you jump out of the gate with Tennessee, who I think South Carolina was very evenly matched against, and you move on to now a Florida team that's playing just with a ton of confidence. It's amazing how far Florida has come since the third quarter, was it maybe about the early fourth quarter of the Kentucky game last year. It looked like they were going to lose, and then Felipe Franks goes down, and Kyle Trask comes in and has completely rejuvenated that program. And so 2 teams heading in opposite directions collide again on Saturday in the Swamp.
All right, so let's assess new OC, new quarterback coming in, Colin Hill, and his play last week. He seems to have found a favorite target in Shi Smith, and we'll get to that, but had the 1 pick 6 in the first half that really wasn't his fault. It looked like he played pretty well in the second half to lead the comeback there. What did you see from him and new offensive coordinator Mike Bobo that there's something to build off of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, if you get into personnel, South Carolina is sorely lacking offensively with personnel. The big-time running back recruit Marshawn Lloyd, a guy who a lot of people thought would carry the offense, tears his ACL in the preseason in a non-contact drill, from what I can understand. Jalen Brooks a wide receiver transfers, a guy that had drawn some very strong praise in preseason camp. He hadn't been able to get cleared by the NCAA. And that's two guys that probably would have been the top 3 or 4 playmakers for South Carolina offensively. And one is out with injury. One, at least as of us recording this, is not eligible for the NCAA. Maybe that changes come noon on Saturday. But there's not a lot to work with. And so I think that did make what Mike Bobo did on Saturday night a little bit more impressive. I think in a way it made what Colin Hill did a little bit more impressive. But teams are going to quickly figure out that if you can bracket or stop Shi Smith, we don't know where South Carolina is going to get the rest of their wide receiving production from. And that could end up, as more teams figure out South Carolina, as more tape becomes available, that could certainly be a massive problem. It might be a big problem on Saturday.
And then, Will, even of course, even though Florida gave up a ton of passing yards last week versus Ole Miss, I mean, maybe South Carolina's best chance of upsetting Florida is to slow the game down as much as they can and run the ball. Didn't have a whole lot of success versus Tennessee last week in running the ball. We'll go back to last season versus Florida. South Carolina did run the ball pretty well with Feaster leading the charge there. What are you looking for in a bounce-back performance in that area?
I don't know. I think, we're still learning what exactly South Carolina is going to do. They've got 3 running backs. Personally, I think they're all secondary running backs. I think they'd be good backups. Kevin Harris got the start last week and had 13 carries for 55 yards, but he's more of a guy who's a bulldozer. He might get you 3 or 4 yards. Maybe every now and then he'll pop off an 11 or 15-yard carry if the blocking is perfect. But he's not a threat. He's not going to take it 75 yards or really 30 yards for that matter. The Sean Fenwick is a guy out of the state of Florida that they were very high on. They fended off some pretty elite programs. Fenwick's a guy who, in his career, has gotten double-digit touches twice, once against Chattanooga 2 years ago and once against Vanderbilt last year. And I realize neither of those teams strike fear into anybody's heart, but he had 100-yard games against both of them. So he's at least shown the ability to make some things happen. And last week had 31 yards on 6 carries. I think personally, if you want my opinion, I think he should be the starter on Saturday. I said on our radio program this morning, I think that he should get 15 to 18 carries on Saturday. That's what I think he should do. It's not what I think will happen. Total difference there. But that's the guy. He's shown some production, and he had a little bit of burst to him on Saturday. They had 4 catches for about 40 yards. He's a guy that I'm intrigued by. I don't know enough about, and maybe could be upper echelon running back in this league, but I think he's got to get carries, and we've got to see what he can do. We'll see if that happens on Saturday. And then the third guy, Zaquandre White, was originally a running back at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher. They tried to move him to linebacker. He didn't want to do that. He transferred to Iowa Community College and has been on campus now. And he's kind of, if there's a guy that could touch it and maybe change the momentum of a game with a 70 or 75-yard touchdown run, it's him. The problem is I think he's still trying to figure everything out with this offense and what's going on. And he's not a guy that I expect to factor. He did get 7 carries on Saturday against Tennessee for 19 yards. He looked a little loose with his ball security. That's something to keep an eye on. But that's the third guy. We'll see what exactly his role is on Saturday afternoon.
All right, Will Gunter, co-host of the Early Game on 107.5, The Game in Columbia, South Carolina, previewing these South Carolina Gamecocks as we move to the other side of the ball. And the headline there, Will, is big news comes out this week that senior linebacker Sherrod Green will be out for a few weeks now after a hip injury suffered in the game versus Tennessee. How big of a loss is that?
It's hard to say because he's a guy that certainly has got a lot of experience, but I don't know if he's lived up to what everybody hoped he would be coming out as a recruit, and has had some moments, but has also really struggled at times. And a lot of people thought maybe this actually might be a good year for him because obviously he's not losing any eligibility. There's a lot of people who thought he should have redshirted his first year on campus and been allowed to come along slowly, but that simply didn't happen. And so he's had an up and down career. And it's hard to say. There's a freshman that may get more playing time out of North Carolina. They're very high on Mo Kaba. He is coming off of a torn ACL last year during high school, but is a guy that they really like and that they think can be kind of a big-time SEC linebacker. Didn't play much last week. He may get some more snaps now. And so there's some people I've talked to said this may end up being a good thing. Certainly you don't like losing senior leadership, but it's hard to say right now. Linebacker was not the issue last week, though. That was not the issue, and we'll get into this defense a little bit, but it's hard for me to say that that's a massive injury that could play a role on Saturday.
And okay, yeah, you brought that up, and the run defense there Will gave it gave Tennessee some issues in the first half, but second half Tennessee finds some success on the ground, and Tennessee come out with some up tempo in the second half. How much that play a factor in just maybe the chunk run plays that Tennessee ended up getting, and overall, besides that little period of the game, how did the run defense play overall? I go back. I've talked about that this week. I think Tennessee's offensive line, I knew going into that game that Tennessee's offensive line would likely be one of, if not the best that South Carolina faced. I'm not a huge Tennessee is back or Tennessee's a top 20 team, but I do think that they've got a really strong offensive line, and that's minus Cade Mays, who didn't play on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And so we thought that would be a test for South Carolina's defense. Gamecocks hold them to about 10 yards rushing in the first half, and then Tennessee comes out. Tennessee finished the game with 123 yards, either 123 or 133 yards rushing, but 63 of those came on that opening drive. And I was in the stands, and I tell you what, it just looked like South Carolina was discombobulated. I'm not sure if they drank too much Gatorade at halftime and they were moving a little slow. It didn't look good. I can tell you that body language didn't look good. It looked like there was confusion. I was kind of blown away with just the body language of the players to start the second half, and it seemed very strange that Tennessee took advantage. They ran 10 plays, or ran 8 plays, I think, and all 8 were running plays, and they just went right down the field without much of a problem. And then South Carolina's defense kind of bowed back up and held them the remainder of the game. And so that was kind of a weird thing. So I think South Carolina's defensive line in general did a good job. The defensive line has got some guys on it. I'm interested to see what Will Muschamp does. There's a guy, number 6, Zach Pickens, who was a 5-star player who was pretty impressive last week, and I think should play more this week. He's sophomore. There's another 5-star player that they got, Jordan Birch, who's kind of a defensive end / linebacker, and he only played about 7 plays last week and kind of made an impact, but was going against Trey Smith, and Trey Smith popped him a couple times and put him on his rear end. So I think Jordan Birch had some welcome to the SEC moments. But there's some talent there. And at times last week they performed well. The key with the defense, we kind of get into this in a minute, is the secondary enforcing turnovers. That was the difference last week. South Carolina had 2 turnovers. One was a pick 6. One was obviously the punt at the end of the game. They didn't force any turnovers on Tennessee last week, and that's something that really has been astounding with Will Muschamp and his defensive teams here. The year South Carolina went 9-4, they were able to force turnovers. They were able to set up the offense for easy scores. Last 2 years, and then Saturday night, forcing the turnover has become about the most difficult thing South Carolina is trying to do in football. They just flat struggle doing it, and that was huge on Saturday night. Yeah, we go to that secondary, and the Vols' passing offense with Garantano didn't really go off, Will, but just when it felt like South Carolina was settling down on defense, kind of like you were saying, just when it felt like they were settling down on defense and things were going right, Garantano does what he does well and finds some big chunk plays that led the scores for Tennessee. Israel Mukuamu didn't play all of the Tennessee game last week with a groin injury as well. So what's the outlook in the secondary, especially seeing what Florida did last week through the air and then the kind of chunk plays that showed up last week?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mukuamu played the first half and then was out with a groin injury there in the second half. And Cam Smith, who, again, was a highly rated 4-star defensive back, chose South Carolina over Georgia from right here in town, and had a bunch of offers and was really well thought of. He struggled. He's, as a matter of fact, the guy, he gives up the game-winning touchdown and then has the ball hit him on the foot. He really could have had a worse night, to be quite honest. I guess he could have tripped Muschamp going to the locker room, and maybe that would have made it worse. But
Or better.
I mean, he had a bad. Yeah. He had a bad night. He had a real bad night, and he's going to have to play better, man. Because I tell you what, we talked about it on the radio this morning. You look at those Florida receivers, and I'm not even talking about Kyle Pitts. I'm talking about the receivers and Grimes and Copeland. And, Justin Shorter only had 2 catches for 8 yards last week, but, he's capable of doing some things. And that's, Kadarius Toney's going to line up all over the field. Well, that's 4 guys right now that are pretty much better, in my opinion, than anything that Tennessee was going to put out there. And then that's not counting Kyle Pitts. So you get into South Carolina secondary a little bit. J.C. Horn is going to match up on somebody. We'll see who. Jamie Robinson is a guy that can come down and play the nickelback spot, and I think he'll match up. And then we'll see if McQuamu can go. And then how does South Carolina try to cover Kyle Pitts? Do they do it with a linebacker? Probably a bad matchup. Do they do it with McQuamu, which forces you to put another defensive back out there? So it's not a good matchup for South Carolina there right now with their secondary and what the speed Florida will bring to the wide receiver position.
Yeah, that's something I'm interested in, Will, and looking at that matchup. And that particular matchup is, do you not give up the big play like you did the Garantano? Like I said, he's known for that. That's kind of just basically his bread and butter is just living off the big play, right. Not so much that. If they can limit the big play for Florida, I wonder if that forces Florida to try and run the ball to bring them up a bit, or if Florida just comes out slinging it anyway.
I don't know. We go back to last year, and you mentioned it. South Carolina made Kyle Trask and Florida work for all their points.
Yep.
And then that game turned dramatically there. People up here forget it. I mean, I don't know if South Carolina fans understand what was happening. South Carolina leads that game with 10 minutes to go. Prince, the running back, runs down the left sideline, and boy, people here are still angry about the left tackle jumping off sides and that not being called.
Oh, the Damian Pierce run. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people up here, but I've said all before, South Carolina, Florida goes up 24-21, and South Carolina's defense had kept them in the game. And it's like you said, they had forced Florida to move the football and not giving up the chunk play. And South Carolina was really there. Well, then South Carolina drives down the field. I really think they're about to score a touchdown and go up and win that game. I think it was 24-20. Really, you go back to that. South Carolina got going, ran the ball right down Florida's throat, got to the 6-yard line, had run the ball successfully, and then Brian McClendon calls a play-action pass, and Ryan Helinski gets sacked. South Carolina's got to kick a field goal. I think that made it actually 24-20 in favor of I'd have to go back and look at the box score, but anyway, I think actually it was 2017. I think South Carolina went up 2017, and then Florida just took over and scored 3 touchdowns in 5 minutes, and 2 of those were aided by a turnover, and there was 2 short fields that Florida got, and it went from 2017 to 38-20, really in the blink of an eye. But until that point, South Carolina had limited the big play and forced Kyle Trask to beat them with short throws and had eliminated the run game. I don't know if they'll be able to do that on Saturday. I think this defense is better, but I don't know if they'll be able to do that on Saturday afternoon.
Now, well, before we wrap up here, great, look into that game here. Week 1 in the SEC. Some, of course, time for overreaction and hot takes after only seeing one game, especially after this crazy offseason we just had. What caught your eye throughout the SEC? I know, of course, Mississippi State beating LSU. Florida's offensive onslaught, and then some big games coming up this weekend with Georgia Auburn headlining that. What caught your eye so far?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to remember is that with the current pandemic and with the virus, things are going to change just week to week, and you don't know what you're going to get. I mean, by the time we get the kickoff on Saturday, who knows what the testing, who's been tested positive or negative, who knows? I think that's one, because you see that news come out. I guess Saturday morning, not that he tested positive for the virus, but Derek Stingley, that was huge for LSU. So I think the first thing that I continue to think is that regardless of, you can't look at a schedule, I think, and go down the line and say, hey, that's a victory, because I think every week is going to be entirely different. After that, I'm intrigued to see more of Florida. I watched that game. I saw the issues defensively. I was kind of following you on Twitter and keeping up with your insight. But I'm intrigued to see more of it. Georgia, we'll see if JT Daniels is the answer at quarterback this week. But my goodness, they looked just brutal with Stetson Bennett. I know Stetson comes in the second half, and they got that offense cranked up. And if you didn't watch the game, you probably were unaware it was, 7-5 at halftime. But I mean, Georgia did not impress me. Texas A&M, they get Alabama this week, but they struggled with Vanderbilt. You look around, I think it's wide open. I'm not even sure how much I'm buying into Alabama at this point in this league. I can't decide whether it's Alabama and then a host of teams behind them, or if Alabama right now with Mac Jones is backed up to the pack just a little bit. So I think not counting South Carolina, by the way, I don't want your listeners to listen to this and think, oh, he thinks South Carolina got a chance. No, I don't think that. But I do think when you look at Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Auburn, maybe even throw Texas A&M in there, depending on how you feel about Kellen Mond. I feel like those five really are very competitive. And then we'll see what Mike Leach does with Mississippi State and if that talent at LSU is able to gel throughout the year.
Now, do you think after what you saw through 1 week, we'll end it on this and go back to the state of Mississippi right quick? You think Ole Miss and what Lane Kiffin showed on offense, and then what Mike Leach of course showed in getting the upset at LSU, you think their teams are going to run or rise to the not top, of course, but they're sitting there and making it tough for Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Texas A&M in the coming years?
I don't think Mississippi will. I think Lane Kiffin is a smart play caller, and I think he did some things that were creative that caught Florida off guard. When you talk about Reese Plumlee and Corral kind of going out there and being on the field at the same time and switching positions and kind of doing some things, and then just general first game stuff. But I think you saw the talent level start to take over, and I don't think Mississippi will do that. I think Mike Leach is terrifying. I think that he will do a lot of what he's done at Texas Tech and Washington State, which is he'll jump up and bite you. If you go into that game and you're not prepared and he gets that passing game cranked up, he'll jump up and bite you. But that defense for his has never been an elite defense. And as the season wears on and smart defensive coordinators, guys, more athletes in the SEC start to be prepared for that defense, for that offense, can his defense stop other teams? You look at some of the games they would lose at Washington State, and there were defenses that would figure that out, or his quarterback would have an off night. And when that happened, it went south on him in a hurry. So I'll be interested to see if Mississippi State, they get Arkansas this week, and they'll win by about 77 or something. But, as this season goes on, I'll be interested to see that with teams trying to adjust to or catching up to that offense.
Sounds good. Will, good man, I can't thank you enough. Will Gunter, co-host of the early game on 107.5 The Game in Columbia, South Carolina, joining us once again to preview these South Carolina Gamecocks. Will, hope a good game on Saturday. We can both enjoy it in some ways, but once again, thank you so much for the great preview.
I always appreciate this time of year, but I always appreciate talking to you. Look forward to doing it.
Thanks, man. Football is back. MLB playoffs and the NBA finals are starting, which can only mean one thing. It's winning season at MyBookie. A game is 10 times more exciting when putting money on it. Sometimes you have a gut feeling about a matchup, or sometimes you just want to bet on your team because they're your team. Regardless, whether you've been betting for years or you're ready to play for the first time, MyBookie is your best bet this season with the biggest online selection of bets and props. They've made it simple to win and easy to withdraw your cash. Right now, MyBookie has a $100,000 super contest for only a $10 entry, and they're giving away $5,000 in cash prizes every 4 weeks. You would be crazy not to invest your sports knowledge with that kind of potential return on your investment. $10 to win thousands? It's a no-brainer. Sign up at MyBookie, just use the promo code Gators, and you can grab a free $20 wager with your first deposit to bet on anything in the sportsbook. It's an easy way to jumpstart your bankroll. College football, NFL, NBA, and MLB, they've got it all on tap, and it's never too late to get started on your winning season, only at MyBookie. So let's get into this matchup here. Once again, sorry for the way I sound or if look, or if you're watching on YouTube. allergies are getting the best of me today. So gonna power through it here. But yeah, you may see or hear some hiccups along the way here. But yeah, looking at this game even more, and I know everybody's kind of focusing on the defense just because of all the problems that we saw versus Ole Miss last week. So I mean, I'm just very interested in seeing how Todd Grantham attacks and adjust here. That's I know talking to a lot of you out there is just the whole third and Grantham thing, of course blows up, but maybe sometimes a lack of adjustments by Todd Grantham as well. And look, last week, I mean, it didn't matter if he only sent 3 or if he blitzed. Matt Corral made plays at the quarterback position. So I think when you transfer that and kind of look at this game versus South Carolina, Gamecocks quarterback Colin Hill, he isn't going to do that. He's torn his left ACL 3 times. I mean, look, he's not he's not an athletic, mobile quarterback like Matt Corral anyway. But after tearing that ACL 3 times, you have to, assume that he's not going to have the type of escapability that one Matt Corral had. So, Mike Bobo has a history. We saw it plenty at Georgia. So something I want to look for in maybe going against an aggressive, most of the time aggressive Todd Grantham defense is Bobo has a history, and like I said, go back to Georgia and watch that. It has a big time history of running backs to the screens to the running backs, and that's a huge staple of his offense. And South Carolina had trouble running those type of plays versus Tennessee last week. So yeah, but it is a staple of a Mike Bobo offense. So I would just kind of still keep an eye on those type of plays here. So if an adjustment from Grantham is to go after a slower hill by blitzing at times. If the front 3 and front 4 aren't getting the pressure on their own, look to see how much Bobo runs those screens and if he can dial one up at the perfect time. See if he can match one up when Grantham's bringing the house, and they can try and get behind all those blitzers. Use the blockers to block the linebackers, defensive backs, and South Carolina making hit a big play there in that fashion. I don't think they're going to hit the same type of big plays that we saw Ole Miss hit last week, and we'll get into that as well. But it's the perfect blitz beater, and Bobo runs them a lot. So he's changed his offense a bit from Georgia. There's a little more spread, not so much pro style, but when they run the ball, and I think you give that kind of look off of those running back screens as well. That's just where to look out for it at. So I don't know, obviously, if he's going to run it as much as he did at Georgia, because you had a lot more talent at the running back position as well for the Bulldogs. But we're just looking at that to kind of be the blitz beater if Todd Grantham decides to get a little more aggressive. So you will have to see these defenders and these linebackers, linebackers and cornerbacks in particular, have to come up, shed some blocks, make tackles better than they did last week. I mean, that was the biggest issue I think a lot of us saw out there. And it is so hard to say that, it's hard to gauge a lack of effort when you're just watching TV. Sometimes you can see it, but I do think there was so much guessing and second guessing of what they were seeing on from what Ole Miss was bringing to the table. And I think you just react a little bit slower. You play a little bit slower. And I think sometimes that can, lead to make it look like a lack of effort. So I think we'll get a better gauge on that type of thing. And look, and Kyrie Elam said it. We said it earlier this week in an earlier episode. They were pissed off at what they saw out there. So you hope all that kind of translates into a slower paced offense in South Carolina, not really going to go up to the line of scrimmage as fast as what Ole Miss did. Maybe they try and implement that since they know Florida had trouble with it last week, but I doubt it. That's just kind of not the style there. But I really think the South Carolina offense, they're going to really try and play this one slow and try and shorten the game to keep the Florida offense off the field. Last year, you remember, running back Tavion Feaster had his best game as a Gamecock, rushing 25 times for 175 yards versus Florida's defense. But he's no longer there, and this run game is coming off of a tough performance versus Tennessee last week. So stopping the running game that only averaged 2.5 yards per rush last week, while Florida gave up 3.8. So to me, that sets up for Hill having to win the game by himself. I don't think South Carolina is going to magically run the ball, given who they have at running back right now, their struggles versus Tennessee last week, and Florida's run defense, besides the one play where Ely scored on and broke a bunch of tackles, didn't really have a whole lot of success. Now, don't get me wrong; they didn't have to run the ball with the way they were passing, so I think that plays into it a little bit as well. But I like what I saw most part from the rush defense there for the Gators last week. So, this offensive line for South Carolina, they're going to have to play much better, give Hill some time, and hopefully the front three, front four for Florida can generate enough pressure there to just. Because there's going to be times Grantham, with a side dependency his back on Hill, and maybe kind of test his mobility a bit, especially if the front 3-4 not getting pressure. But he's not elusive enough to do what Corral did last week. And we'll have to use quick decisions, quick throws to avoid the pressure. That could lead to some turnovers as long as the defensive backs for Florida are up in coverage, pressing those South Carolina wide receivers. And I'll get into that a bit here too. But one more note on Gamecocks quarterback Colin Hill. He's faced Florida once already. Go back a couple years ago, Dan Mullen's first year. Hill in Colorado State. Mike Bobo was the head coach at Colorado State. One reason Hill came over to South Carolina. So all the way back on September 5th, 2018, of course, Colorado State got beat by Florida 48-10. Hill did play in that game a little bit, 2 for 8, 23 yards in that game. And look, I know it's just a neat note. It doesn't mean anything for this coming up Saturday, but him and Bobo have been in the swamp together a couple years ago. So this is just a neat little note there. Like I said, that performance has nothing to do with translating for what we're going to do see this coming up Saturday, but a note nonetheless. But here we go. Of course, if Grantham decides to let loose with the blitz and the communication, the coverage, we know, guys, it's obvious. It has to be better than last week, and not have a quarterback wide receiver combo go off last week like Ole Miss did. And Corral and Elijah Moore back last week hooked up 10 times for 227 yards. Well, last week, South Carolina had something a little bit similar here. And last week, Hill and wide receiver Shi Smith hooked up 10 times as well for 140 yards and a touchdown. So South Carolina has, they haven't been some great passing team the last few years. And Shi Smith is still 12th on the school's all-time receptions list with 127. He needs 15 catches to tie Sidney Rice for 10th all-time on that list. He has 1,711 career receiving yards, and he needs 365 yards to match Deebo Samuel for 10th on the school's all-time list. So, look, guys, those are big names for South Carolina that we've seen in recent years, Sidney Rice and Deebo Samuel, and Shi Smith's right up there with those guys. So it lets you know the potential and how much South Carolina likes to use him. So it's obvious who Florida has to stop in this passing game, but you have to go back and look, all those numbers are good. But he hasn't done it against Florida the last few years. Smith only caught 2 balls last year for 18 yards versus Florida, 2 catches for 24 yards in 2018, and 1 catch for 26 yards back in 2017. So with all those numbers, he hasn't done much versus Florida. So now look, C.J. Henderson's been here for most for those games as well, for most of those games anyway. So that probably plays a little bit in it too. So. We've seen this defense the last 2 games. Go back to the Orange Bowl and versus Ole Miss without C.J. Henderson, and the pass defense has been a little iffy without C.J. out there. So he's been in the games, and he's not been matched up against Shi Smith. So I'm not going to give all the credit to C.J. here, but it worth noting, I guess you should say, that if he decides to go off, much like Moore did last week, what is Grantham going to do to adjust early on? So you can't have the receiver go off again like what we saw last week. But other than Smith, Xavier Leggett, 4 catches for 61 yards last week versus Tennessee. 42 came on 1 reception, so he's maybe their second best option there. But no other Gamecock wide receiver caught a pass but those 2 guys, Smith and Leggett. They spread out among tight ends and running backs. So Grantham needs to take out a lot of the guesswork. The athletes need to man up and play. Besides Smith, Muschamp mentioned South Carolina has issues there, and this is what Will Muschamp had to say this week. And coming off that Tennessee game and looking forward to Florida, he says, "quote, you have to win in man coverage in this league. We had some guys targeted. If you can't create separation, it's hard to throw it to you. We're not going to throw the ball to a guy that can't get open. We're going to see man coverage Saturday. We're going to see it the rest of the year in our league, especially in those deny the ball downs at 3rd and 6. You have to win versus man coverage. So it was an obvious issue for South Carolina last week. I hope Grantham brings these DBs up. I know you can give up some big plays there, but they struggled last week, and I really do think I think you can pressure Hill into making some quick decisions, some quick throws, and if your DBs are up on these wide receivers, I think you have a chance for some turnovers here, some interceptions with that close coverage. So, look, Florida will get a little help. South Carolina won't be Ole Miss with all the window dressing, up-tempo offense style. For the defense, pressure the quarterback, identify that matchup with Shi Smith, stop him, even if you have to throw some more help Marco's way by covering Smith in the slot. Make sure he's not beating you. Get up in the faces of the other wide receivers and make them beat you. So that's what I'm looking for there with the defense and what they can do to improve second game of the season after the disappointing performance versus Ole Miss. So other side of the ball, it's a lot easier on offense after what we saw last week, and kind of to identify what needs to be done. And the Trask needs, to me, just continue hitting chunk plays, hit the big plays. South Carolina gave up 5 passes of 20 yards or more to Tennessee's Jarrett Garantano last week. And look, for all the criticism of Garantano, he does a pretty good job of throwing the deep ball and completing deep passes there. So that ability is there. It looks like we see that ability from Kyle Trask a bit more, too, after one game. So Trask also had 5 of those last week. But Garantano, like I said, is more known for that. So with the steps of this offense has taken in that regard, I look for Trask to hit on that and possibly even more with this Gator defense here. This is a good game to show, to me, for Trask that he's in command and in control of the offense. And that means maybe even playing within the offense a bit. Will Muschamp can scheme up a good plan. And I know it was raining last year in that game in Columbia, but it wasn't Trask's best game, and I won't blame it all on the rain. I was there in the first half when the rain wasn't that bad. Trask was just playing okay. When the rain got worse, he actually played better in the game. So, going back to last year, they gave Kyle Trask some trouble a bit, or early on anyway. But Trask got better. Rain went on. South Carolina made him work last year, 21-33 for only 200 yards, but he did have 4 touchdown passes. So to me, in a way, that was one example of kind of playing within the offense. But this is a different, I think, playing within the offense this year. I can see a scenario where Muschamp dials up the secondary, not letting the big plays happen again, and making Trask work for everything, and maybe even setting up the run game early to try and draw the secondary up, and that's when you'll hit your big plays. So I think Florida is too good if we see a lot of press man on the wide receivers. I think Florida's got some athletes at the receiver position, so I expect Muschamp and that defense to play it safe, mix up their coverage between man zone, and maybe try to slow the game down there too. Not letting the big plays happen, make Florida work for everything, and slow the game down for Florida's offense to have to maybe put together 7, 8, 9, 10 play drives. And then when South Carolina's on offense, run the ball, short passes, and you march down the field too. Just kind of limit Florida's possessions. And when Florida's on the field, you just make them drive for it to kind of limit possessions overall in the game. So given that scenario, I really want to see the Florida run game kind of continue what they did last week. It's, to me, and we'll get into it with some of your comments too, so I'll kind of save it for that. But the run game, I like what I saw last week. Can they get better? Absolutely. But it was one of the better performances we have seen since 2018, given it all. I know a lot of it was helped by Kadarius Toney's 50-yard run, but, the running backs had over 6 yards of carry as well. So I just think we want to see more cohesiveness from the offensive line. You had some chances there for even more. Reese pulling around. And I thought they would run behind him more. But when they would run left, he would pull, and just a little slow in some of the spots there. So I think as his offensive line plays together more, I like what Brett Heggie brings to the table at center. He played with an aggressive, mean streak there we didn't necessarily see last year from Buchanan. So I think that is one step that for if you want to identify where the offensive line got better last week and how it can look moving forward, I think we all expected it to come from maybe Stuart Reese early on. But to me, it's actually been Brett Hagee kind of being that linchpin right now for showing the mean streak toughness that we didn't necessarily see at times last year. So did he miss some plays last week as well? Absolutely. Not going to be perfect. We know that. And as Will said earlier this week, you're looking for a baseline to start with this offensive line. Last year versus Miami in the first game, that baseline was not good. You start with a baseline with what we saw last week versus Ole Miss, you kind of get a little, I won't say excited, but a better baseline to start with. Maybe the expectation rises just a bit from what we saw there. So let's put it together 2 weeks in a row, and we'll see where it goes from there. So with all that being said, last week I actually picked the point spread versus Florida Ole Miss. I had a 16-point game, and that's what it ended up being, but it was a lot higher scoring game than I gave it credit for there. So I had the point spread right, but it was pretty good there. So let's go with this week, and I got a score of Florida 40, South Carolina 20. I think the game, like I said, will slow down a bit, so there may not be as many drives because I don't expect South Carolina to score as much or as fast as Ole Miss did last week. Still think Florida takes advantage of most of their possessions, force South Carolina to some short 3, 4, 5 play, 6 play drives, and then get the ball back to the offense. And the offense will continue to score 40-20. And that's what I'm looking for the Gators here. So let me pull up, getting some thoughts from you guys. I asked you what you wanted to see this week as Florida matches up against South Carolina. And let's go with Donald Lipscomb says, personnel changes on defense. I think we need to roll more guys through across the board to keep them fresh. Dean earned more play at safety, in my opinion. Want to see Hopper and Wingo out linebacker on third down. Get freshmen in game more at D-line to spell Slayton Dunlap there. I'm kind of mixed on that. We saw Rashad Torrance kind of struggle a little bit, but as Todd Grantham told me in the press conference when I asked him about what happened when Sean Davis was going out, he goes, it was good that Torrance went out there and got the experience because the experience is what they're going to need to get better moving forward, of course. And, I think you keep your best players out there right now. We'll see where it goes from there. I don't want any breakdowns on coverage. And I know that comes with playing the young guys, but we need to see something solidified on this defense this week. So, I think if you can keep your starters in a good bit in the first half, maybe build a lead to where then you can get your young guys some playing time. That's probably the route I'd go because after seeing what we saw last week, I think everybody on defense, including the starters, including your front line, your top guys, need to play better, and I think they need to play as a unit out there better. So I think you take your best players, see what you can get out of your best players, and then go from there. I do agree, though, Trey Dean deserves more time, so maybe through the game last week and practice this week, they've identified him as a player that needs to be on the field a bit more. And him with the experience, it doesn't matter if he's not a starter or quote or not. He can be one guy that can absolutely be rotated in a bit more there. Hopper Wingo at linebacker on third down. We'll see what happens. Linebacker looked like they were missing a few pieces last week, probably some different circumstances. Players missing time through COVID during camp and all that. So I think some players are behind a little bit there. So hopefully all back can get some playing time as well. There, I know everybody's kind of looking at Amari Burney and maybe pulling him out a bit and inserting another player in there. We'll see how that goes. I think we just kind of have to see how all that works out, given everything that has happened in the offseason with players missing time and all that good stuff. So let's see. Tyler at Star Rock Dunk Top says defense needs to play well enough that the South Carolina offense looks like they're a Will Muschamp coach team. If we can do that, I'll be content with the defense. Yeah, we'll see. it is a Will Muschamp coach team. How much does he trust Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, to hand over the reins? He should trust him a lot. I like what Bobo did at Georgia. Doesn't have the talent right now at South Carolina to to get that going. Florida had a lot of success versus Bobo at Georgia as well. So, that's kind of if Muschamp can trust him, I think the offense does get better. Year one, I still think, even with Colin Hill, a quarterback that Bobo coached at Colorado State, I still think there's so many questions with that offense in South Carolina. But I think Bobo is the right guy. That Will Muschamp, I think this is his last guy, guys, to either extend Will Muschamp's head coaching career. And if it doesn't work out with Bobo, Will Muschamp's in trouble for getting maybe another high tier SEC job. I don't think he gets another one if it fails with Bobo. Maybe goes and gets a group of 5 head coaching jobs somewhere. But this is his last ditch effort to kind of, to me, save his head coaching career. So Lou in a bunch of numbers, 336-83943 there. So he says he wants to see a more sustainable run game, defensive pressure up the middle, and our secondary looking adequate enough to make a championship run. Talked about a bit already. More pressure up front through the middle. I can see that. I think the defensive line and even the linebackers too, a lot like as I kind of went to it earlier in the episode, a little tentative because of what they were seeing from Ole Miss. And once Corral started making plays with his legs, I think the whole defense started playing a little bit slower, and that pressure kind of got dialed back a little bit in their head and from Todd Grantham, trying to save the big play happening. And so they were in position sometimes. Corral made plays, made guys miss, even beyond the line of scrimmage, and getting that extra 1-2 yards to convert a third down. So I just want them to see him play not as tentative as what they saw last week. And I think opposing quarterback play has a lot to do with that. And I think that really helps Todd Grantham and the Gator defense this week. AC at FTE_Gators says, give me a stronger defense and consistency in the run game. And just want to see the D get more pressure and try to force a turnover or two. Offense can stay the same. I spoke on most of that earlier. David Soderquist, better defensive play, especially in the backfield. Even more in the running game, a little more from special teams returning kicks, defensive turnovers, Will Muschamp letting to kick field goals instead of scoring touchdowns. Hit on a lot of that here, but one thing I will a little more on special teams. As far as special teams go, I'm at the point now with especially with the way this Florida offense is, and we know can score. Just don't mess it up. I don't need a big kickoff return. I don't need a big punt return. I need a kickoff and punt return not to turn the ball over, and not muff a punt or fumble a kickoff return. I'm fine with playing it safe on special teams just because I trust this offense now. It's not going back to the Will Muschamp and Jim McElwain days where we think we need a good return just to set up the offense in good field position just to get some kind of points. I have so much belief in this offense. I think Dan Mullen does too. I think we saw the safety play like that with Freddie Swain back there in return. And look, you do have a little more playmaking ability back there with Kadarius Toney. And so I do think they probably want a bit more with him back there. But I think after what we saw from him last week from the receiver position as well, they trust him to make the right decision and catch the ball when he needs to and try and go make plays when he needs to back there. So I think it's, with Toney, you can get the big play if it's there, but also I think right now you get the safety net of him making the right decision and not messing anything up and still giving the offense the ball and let them go get the points instead of trying to force points through special teams. Brian Swervelin says, I'd like to see Pierce get going from the start. Also, the offensive line to be less confused, more in sync after the snap. Kind of spoke on that a bit too. Yeah, less confused. Getting around on pulls, I think, is one thing I want to look out for, especially with Reese pulling from right to left. This is the game to get it right. I agree there. Emory needs more looks if he's next year's QB1, but mixed more organically, not scripted. Maybe even extended drives and mop-up duty. I got in a conversation about Emory and this thought of he'd be QB1 next year and all that stuff about playing time. And look, I'm in the mind right now. You worry about next year. And if he can go out there and get playing time and experience, all well and good. He's been in the system, game experience. He's played enough games too to where sprinkling him in, I don't know how much that really does this year, but you can't let him come in and look. I know it wasn't all on him, the interception, but in a tight game, if that was to happen in a game versus Georgia and possessions are at a premium, and you throw up a lame duck interception like that, then that can come back to haunt you. So especially for this year, when you have everything in front of you, and you're kind of labeled as on a championship run. Worry about Emory and his experience next year. Give me Kyle Trask out there every snap if it has to be that way, and go win me the ball game. We can worry about next year. And yeah, I mean, if you can get him out there, it's a bonus, and getting him the experience absolutely helps. But it's an added bonus, and I don't think you force it just to get him experience for next year. Let's see. South Florida Don at D. Parla says the return of DBU is what I want to see. I'm confident Mullen will correct the issues we saw in the opener. Also, another outstanding performance by Trask. I'm really happy to see him get the credit he deserves, and that's would be nice to see as well. With let's keep the Kyle Trask train rolling, and keep that conversation that we've heard all week now. Let's keep it going, and I definitely want to see it too. Florida was in the spotlight this week because of Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitt's play, and a lot of everybody loves offense. That's just what it is right now. Offense sells, and when you have a quarterback slinging it like Kyle Trask did, going to keep Florida in the spotlight. And that only helps recruiting down the road. You get talked about like this, and we saw some recruits' reactions on various websites out there this past week and how excited they were to see this Florida offense rolling. Keep it rolling and keep Florida in the spotlight. Keep Florida in a good light in the media. And look, recruits take notice about stuff like that. So John Williams says, I want to see a defensive line keep the quarterback in the pocket and better tackling. Also improve safety play. Corral took advantage of the edge rushers getting too far upfield all game long, but dialing back an aggressive line is not the worst problem to have. And Georgia sucks. Yeah, I mean, I talked about most of that too. Let's just, tentative play, I think, come along with that last week. Hopefully we see more sound play up front this week. Gator Fan 81 says multiple sacks and pressures from the defensive line. I don't want a quarterback to have any time to even think about who he wants to throw to. Also, I want 4 touchdowns through the air. Kind of going all that backs up a lot of the comments I wanted to say about putting pressure on Hill, not giving him time to think about it. Put the DBs up. Maybe you get some turnovers there. Black, let's see. At David Lundeen on Twitter says, I want to see that confused look on Muschamp's face when he is losing another game to the Gators. I think we all want to see that one, of course, too. At LRYALL140, talked to him a good bit here on Twitter. I don't know what, like I said, the name there. Hopefully it's in all caps, so I'm just going to say all the letters there instead of trying to figure out what it's trying to say. He wants the defense to be more prepared, get faster, more energy, offense, more of Tony, get Copeland involved, and a running back to have a big day. Like I said, like we were talking about with Kyle Trask and continuing, another performance from Kadarius Toney, I think, would give a lot of people more confidence that he has taken those steps and not just a one-hit wonder last week, like we've seen from him in the past sometimes. And continue seeing him run routes as a true wide receiver and continue to see him as that gadget player making big plays. He's the perfect weapon if he can do both of those. And the prediction and the predictable play from him in the past, him being a more well-rounded receiver, a player can only help that. Get Copeland involved. Yeah, we saw Copeland really early on last week and kind of faded as the game went on. But 11 guys caught the ball. That's going to happen in some of these games. You'll see some flashes early, and the guys will fade away. You'll see some flashes in the middle or late in the game, that didn't necessarily happen earlier in the game. So the way Trask and Mullen spread the ball around, we'll see some hot and cold numbers from some players out there. A couple more here. Daniel Cannon says, I want to see the offense pick up where they left off and improving on the defensive side of the ball. Gators mains at Tyrone Couples says, run game a little bit more and the defense clean up the sloppiness. Andy R. _realtor said, defense, obviously, but the run game established early. Can we block a punt, take a kick or punt to the house? Hit on most of the special teams there. Can we block a punt? That would be nice to see as far as special teams go. Just haven't seen a whole lot of that. And that might be going into playing a little bit safe too, and getting the ball back to your offense. Why risk getting a roughing the punter and keeping the opposing offense on the field right now when you could just play a little bit safe, catch the ball, get your offense on the field. So I see both ways there. It is interesting because I know everybody wants to go back to Urban Meyer and wants that type of speed and pump blocking ability on the field there. But I think Dan Mullen's a little more conservative in that regard. At Gator Growl, UK Swamp says, I'm feeling spoiled on offense already, but I'd like to see our run game make more progress. Our secondary has to step up and our defensive line has to take control. Last couple right here. Kavern Harris, defense better tackling, get lined up in communication. I think that's the biggest thing this week. That had to be worked on because that's the most basic of improvements this Gator defense can make. Get in position when the ball is snapped, and you're there to make a play, and you're not guessing. You're not trying to get in your spot when the ball is snapped. Be there, ready to go. And he says on offense, keep working the run, continue to spread it around, be aggressive. And Swamp LS says defense clean things up, better tackling, take away big plays by better coordination in the secondary. Offense to remain. This was an interesting point too, kind of a little bit from what we've already talked about. Offense to remain explosive, so it wasn't quote only because it was Ole Miss. Get more players in the rotation involved that we may need to count on later in this season. And the point about only because it was Ole Miss, that was thrown around a bit this week, of course. Hey, Florida put up those yards because it was Ole Miss. Well, one thing, that's true, but at least you did what you were supposed to do. And I'm a big fan of that. Did Georgia do what they were supposed to do last week versus Arkansas? No, they did not. And that's why they have so many questions surrounding their team right now. Warranted this early in the season. Well, they have plenty of time to improve. But right now, through one game, you can say that about Florida's offense. They did what they were supposed to do versus an overmatched defense. Georgia did not. Did it get better for them? Yes. But they did not do what they were supposed to do when you look at the matchups. And so, yeah, we want to see it again from this Florida offense. Go out there, put another stellar performance together, and you're going to get talked about even more. And that puts some confidence, I think, in the players that, hey, this is 2 SEC games now. We've went out there and we've dominated on offense. And, a lot, and we saw the confidence last year, I think, but it did, fall by the wayside when they went and played Georgia. So, just continue this, maybe put some more confidence, and then by the time you get to that Georgia game, even if some bad things happen, you still have the confidence that you can go out there and because what you've done up until that point, get some confidence into your offense to use and figure some things out. But that's way down the road. But yeah, through 2 games, it'd be nice to say, hey, this offense is humming. It did pick up where it left off last year. Gotten better in a lot of regards, and let's keep it going. So everybody, thank you so much for sending all those comments. I always like getting your input and breaking down what you guys are saying and how I can and how I look at it as well. So, of course, before we go, let's take a look around the SEC and what's coming up. A few interesting games this week. Of course, nothing major except for one game, Georgia-Auburn. We'll get into that. As we said, noon kickoff, South Carolina, Florida. That's games on ESPN. Also, noon game, Missouri and Tennessee. Can Tennessee win their second game of the year? After beating South Carolina last week, Missouri played Alabama last week, had a lot of players out. They didn't embarrass themselves. I think Alabama probably could have run it up a bit more if they wanted to, but Missouri, not a terrible performance there. So, how will they open up against? How will they play against Tennessee? As Tennessee looks to go 2-0 and stay in the race with Florida and Georgia in the SEC East. CBS 3:30 game is Florida's next opponent, Texas A&M and Alabama. Interesting game there as Texas A&M is coming off of a struggling performance versus Vanderbilt, and then Alabama hosting their first home game here. So we'll see if A&M, they can play Alabama tough sometimes. So we'll see whether Kellen Mond test that Alabama defense at all. Texas A&M's got some players opting out, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Now Alabama's wide receivers, led by Waddle there, can they continue their performance there? So interesting game to watch, of course, because Texas A&M will host Florida next week. So I know everybody will want to keep an eye on that game. At 4 o'clock, Ole Miss and Kentucky, and desperation mode for those two teams already. I think most people probably come out of last week more impressed by Ole Miss, even in a loss to Florida, than Kentucky in a loss to Auburn. So I think we would want to watch that game and see if Ole Miss can continue their offensive onslaught that they put on Florida last week versus a pretty good defense in Kentucky. And of course, can Kentucky bounce back from last week's disappointing performance versus Auburn and right the ship there. So I think that's interesting to watch because of Kentucky's talent in the trenches, especially on the offensive line, and see how they perform versus that Ole Miss defense as well. So, if you're driving back from Gainesville, hopefully you'll be home in time to catch the 7:30 kickoff of Auburn in Georgia. Glad that game's at night. I'll be home in time to watch that one. Auburn, Georgia, I think all eyes will be on that game and what happens for Georgia at quarterback, of course. Is it JT Daniels? Is it Stetson Bennett? DeJuan Mathis? What's going to happen there? Can they put it together on offense at home? And then Auburn coming off that impressive performance last week versus Kentucky. Can Bo Nix take another step against a really good Georgia defense? This game's intriguing. This probably is the most intriguing game of the SEC so far. Going back, of course, you can say after the fact, Mississippi State and LSU last week, but I think as far as going into a game and the interest level, I think this one takes the cake so far between Auburn and Georgia. Also at 7:30 p.m., Arkansas and Mississippi State. We'll see if Mississippi State can continue and follow up a big win versus LSU last week. Felipe Franks in Arkansas with a bounce back after disappointing second half versus Georgia last week. And then the nightcap, will LSU be able to rebound at Vanderbilt? Don't think there'll be much of a problem there. Will be interesting to see how they bounce back. Are they licking their wounds and, woe is me attitude and just kind of put together? They're going to win that game, but are they going to put together a lackluster performance versus Vanderbilt and keep the questions mounting? Or will they come out ticked off and go out there and put it on Vanderbilt? I don't know if we'll be able to judge either way what type of win LSU has. I think the questions will continue to rise even more if they struggle in that game. But if they go out there and blow out Vanderbilt, everybody will say, well, that's what you should have done. So the questions will continue for LSU as the season wears on, no matter what happens versus Vanderbilt this coming up week. So there's your SEC slate, a bunch of good games there. No headliners really, except for Auburn, Georgia, but some interesting games there to look at and see how teams respond from all the questions surrounding a first game last week, and how would they handle the offseason going into the first game, and how will teams bounce back and improve upon week one going into week two. So there we go. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. Once again, thanks to Will Gunter for his South Carolina preview. We get him on every year to preview South Carolina. Knows South Carolina really, really well. Gives some great insight there. Really enjoy having him on. And that will do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.